Hello, my name is Roman Djindjihashvili, and the purpose of this DVD, there will be no theoretical discussions. There will be no discussions about what is the best move in the opening. We already done that part. Now we go to practical part of playing these openings. Now, I am gonna show you some of the games, most of them been played by me, on the openings that we very well analyzed in a theoretical part, on a theoretical DVD. Now, these games will bring you, they are carefully selected, very typical play in the opening we're going to discuss. Very typical, something that you may be expecting from average player to a strong player. They may not be the best games because the way I've been selecting games from the hundreds and hundreds of different games played by different players, I selected ones that best that show you the best ideas at work. So what you may be expecting from opponent, what you may be playing, and their most common thing that may happen in your game. So again, they are not the best games, they are not the brilliant games, but they are very common and they should be extremely helpful and extremely instructive. So let's get to it. On this DVD, we're going to be discussing and looking at the games played with the accelerated Draken, the way I would recommend to play Queen A5 variation after E4, C5, Knight F3, G6, D4, CD, and I'm discussing this one particular variation. Since white has variety of choices, we understand that, but we're going to be discussing here only the Queen A5 move, only this particular position. So, because this is by far the most important position of accelerated Draken, and besides Queen A5, black can castle here or play even D6, but we're discussing only Queen A5. On Queen A5, the best move for white is castle. White must castle here. F3 is bad because of Queen B4, and I discussed all the consequences of this move on a theoretical DVD on accelerated Draken. So what we should be looking at is castling for white. Black castles and Knight B3. Now, interestingly enough, in move Knight B3, one move earlier, is a very bad move. The reason why Knight B3 is very bad, and amazingly enough, it happened just a couple of months ago in a game between two grandmasters, and with white, this obvious error was played by very talented and super GM American Hikaru Nakamura, but this has nothing to do with strength. It's just he played it carelessly, bishop d3, knight b3, and after queen b4, bishop d3, white simply lost a pawn because of bishop takes c3, bc. Black ends up with extra pawn and hardly any compensation for white. So what happened? Here knight b3 is a bad move, and white must castle, black castles, and now knight b3. Now obviously queen b4 is not gonna get black anywhere. Black's queen is in trouble, and knight takes e4 now allows simply capture back with a knight. So the game we are looking at now was played by me in after queen c7, was played in a short time control, and with white was playing grandmaster overly aggressive and unjustifiedly aggressive, because position didn't call for sharp moves that he made, and he got very bad position and eventually lost. What happened after knight b3, queen c7, f4, black plays d6, and after h3, black plays b6. I played b6 to put the bishop on b7. Now, after b6, white played, in my opinion, obviously bad move, g4. It's too aggressive, and after bishop b7, g5, you see, white's pieces are not prepared to attack. Their rook is not developed on a1. Queen is not developed, supposed to be on f3. Bishop on c4 is in kind of hanging position. After knight d7, black has superior position. Knight d5, simply queen c8. Bishop b5, threatening bishop takes knight, followed by knight takes e7. Rook e8, and f5. When I analyze this position with Ripka suggests that black can simply take the pawn and go back, and white doesn't have enough compensation. And Ripka appreciates initiative very much. Well, I played a6 move, and after bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, I correctly evaluated that white's attack is not going anywhere. f6 was played. That's a bad mistake. Bishop takes d5, and after f takes g, bishop takes e4. Black is absolutely safe and absolutely winning in this position. Rook f4 was played. I played bishop f5, but probably much better was queen takes c2. White has absolutely no compensation. Bishop f5, knight d4, knight e5. Now black's pieces are very active, and you see how it's like spring. All of a sudden, black's pieces became very active. Pawn on g7 is a very white pawn is very good shield for black's king, and white is absolutely lost here. Rook h4 was played. I don't know what the hope is. Maybe somehow take on f5, forcing to take with a pawn and go queen h5, but this is all fantasy and very far from reality. e6 was played, queen e1. To me it was mystery what white was doing at all points. King takes g7, bishop f4, queen c5, and after c3 simply knight f3 check fork. But it's a bad blunder for white, but they were absolutely lost already. So it's a very poorly played game by white. But the reason why I brought this game, I selected, so you may find in your games players that play like this. They go too aggressive, and because their aggression is not based on proper development and properly developed pieces. So that's the normal result of this aggression. Now, next game I'm going to bring, it's a bit different. It's very conservatively played by white. Also, with white there was a GM, quite well-known GM, also shorter time control. G6, well, as you will see, we're going to transpose now to accelerated Draken. Bishop G7, Knight C3, C5, and there it is. We are in accelerated Draken. Knight C6, Bishop E3, Knight F6, Bishop C4, Queen A5, Castle, Castle, Bishop B3, D6, and F3. Now, what is the story with F3 move? That's not the move that is in theory. Theory does not recommend to make this move. And the reason why, white is absolutely safe here, but where is white's play? What is white's plan? White's supposed to be aiming for F4, playing H3 first, and trying to get some activity and some attack on the king's side. If they go F3, it's a very passive approach, very safe for white, very passive. Something you are very likely to see in your games. Actually, I've had a lot of times played against the F3 move, although it's not theoretical move. Bishop D7, Queen D2, Knight takes D4, Bishop takes D4, and Rook F2 C8, Rook A2 D1, A6, King H1. White plays aimlessly, and they don't really have any constructive plan. Queen D8. That was not necessary move, but it's okay move. Now, the reason Queen D8 was played because black wants to go B5 and A5. So they take the queen out of the way, Queen E3, and I want B5, and after E5, D takes C, Bishop takes C5, and Queen E8. Rook D2 was played, Bishop C6, Rook F D1, and B4. Now, this is interesting move with the idea of tactical shot that happened in a game after Knight E2. Knight E4 is very typical tactical shot. Now, if white captures black's bishop, then after knight takes D2, they're simply gonna lose material with hardly any compensation. Some Bishop E5, for example, there's knight takes B3, and there is no compensation at all for white. So they are practically forced to play F takes C, and now black has very well placed bishop on E5 after bishop takes E5, knight D4, E6, c4, b takes c, b takes c, bishop b7, and white played c4, queen e7, knight f3, queen f6, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. Or I'm going to stop here because right now we are on 27th move and game lasted 75 moves. But you can tell that black should be very happy with the position. There's a weak pawn on e4. There is a bad bishop on b3. Yeah, the only thing white has for it is the open d file that cannot bring any significant changes in position. Black is clearly better, and black end up winning this game. This was also very typical game because f3 you can see all the time played in accelerated dragon, although it's not a recommended move. It's not recommended way to play because white has no activity. This is also a game against quite strong a player, played the absolute modern way. And this is the best way, supposedly, to play against accelerated dragon. And you can have this in your games because even the weaker players, average players, can learn opening well enough to make all the best moves according to theory. So knight f3 g6, d4 cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen a5, castles for both sides, bishop b3, d6, h3, bishop d7, and f4. Now, this is also a short time control game. And the reason I brought this game because both sides made some typical error. I did play queen h5, which is the best move here. And one of the possible continuation is queen takes h5, knight takes h5, rook a d1. And the best way to play for black, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop c6, with approximate equality in this position. However, I played rook fc8. I'm not too happy with this move, but rook fc8 was played, g4, and now I made an error that turned out well. But I made an error. It turned out well because my opponent played an error, rook f3. After rook fe1, knight is clearly in trouble, and black has to juggle with the moves like h5 and h4, trying to keep this knight alive, but it's still not something you would want to do in your game. So, but I did expect my opponent go rook f3, and that's exactly what happened. Now, when I played knight g3, I thought if he goes rook f2, I may be taking on d4, taking on c3 sometime, and playing knight takes e4. And if he goes rook f3, I would really be happy as well. He did go rook f3, then knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4, and rook takes d4, rook takes c3, pawn takes c3, knight e2 check, king f2, knight takes d4, pawn takes d4. And this position is okay for black. I played a5, and after a5, f5 was played, which is pretty bad move. And after a5, after f5, a4, bishop d5, and e6. And after fe, fe, white is lost. Bishop b7, takes b7, I mean rook a7, and they lose their bishop. That poorly played game by both sides, but again, the reason I brought, because mistakes are very typical for this opening, and this is the way, look at the game and try to avoid this kind of mistakes by playing when you play this opening. Now, next game is very bizarre pawn structure, but very typical. And this is very typical for this opening, and I even recommended, and this is very typical for this opening, and I even recommended this hard to understand pawn structure on the theoretical DVD. So here is what I'm talking about. e4 c5, knight f3 g6, d4 cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen a5, castle, castle. Again, we got to the standard position. Knight b3, queen c7, and bishop g5. Theory says the best move is to play a6, but I analyzed this position with a Ripka, and also I had slightly different variation of Sicilian, where I also allow same pawn structure that looks terrible, but in reality it's okay for black to do. The move that was played in this position was d6, allowing bishop takes f6. So, but before this happened, what we did is we played also a6 move. Actually, that's the main move I recommend. d6 right away is inaccurate because bishop takes, and if pawn takes, there is knight b5 winning this pawn. So a6 was played, and after bishop e2, d6. Now black welcomes white to take on f6, and taking on with the bishop is not a good idea because knight d5 and followed by knight takes f6, we're going to get the same pawn structure as this one. But you see the difference between these two positions with the same pawn structure is our compensation for a weak pawn on d6 is very strong bishop on g7 after f5, d3, f5, ef, bishop takes f5. Now I like this position. White has pawn structure advantage, black has active two bishops, and its slight pawn weakness on d6 well compensated by the bishop pair, and that's why in this position white played bishop g4. Now they want to eliminate the bishop pair, but it's okay with us as long as we do it on our terms. Bishop e6 was played, rook e1, knight e5. Now white takes, black takes, and there is no longer weakness on d6 because pawn is going to move. After f takes e, knight e3 and d5, knight d4 and queen d6, and knight g4, rook a8 to e8. Black is doing real well. They have very active position and potentially moving center with the enough. After knight takes e5 and bishop takes e5. Now, these pawns, you may say they are weak, but they also may keep moving, and black may have very strong pawn center. So, after g3 and bishop g7, black is doing real well. f4, e5, fe, bishop takes e5. Now we have weak pawn on e5, but if you look now, black's pieces are a lot more active than white's. White has zero advantage, and in fact, I think black has superior position. Again, we don't want to go to the end of this game. Game was quite long and I won. I just show you few moves and what happened after queen g4. Queen b6 was played, rook a b1, queen f6 was played, rook f1, bishop takes d4, and now white recaptured with a pawn. Taking with a queen is real bad because after rook e2 black has significant advantage. So white recaptured with a pawn, then queen e7, and black is a lot better placed on open to verticals f and e. White made an error playing rook e1, and after queen takes e1, pair of rooks are much stronger with so many open files than queen, and eventually black won the game. Interesting position and typical, because the pawn structure that you got in the variation where white plays bishop b5, bishop g5, I mean in this variation, when white plays bishop g5, is very typical. We voluntarily going for this pawn structure, and then we play f5. So eventually what is going to happen, exactly what happened, we have only one tiny weakness on d6. We have two powerful bishops and a quick way to get rooks on open files. Position, in my opinion, at least an equal position for black. Next two games are extremely important and extremely typical for accelerated dragon. You're going to see typical tactical shots that appear right in the opening, and those tactical shots are very essential for black to use, because they practically all counterplay based on the positions after these tactical shots. Let me see what I'm talking about. e4, e5, e4, c5, of course. knight f3, g6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, castle, bishop c4, queen a5 first, of course, and after both sides castle, h3, d6, bishop b3, bishop d7, and queen d2. Bad tactical error by white. This bad tactical error was played in my game against very strong Chinese grandmaster. And interestingly enough, several years ago, when accelerated Draken was not very that well explored, and queen d2 was played, this error, same error, was played by Anatoly Karpov against much weaker opponent, but because it was Karpov, an opponent was much weaker, Karpov was able to make a draw. However, the position is bad for white after this move. The error I'm talking about is knight takes d4, and amazingly here white in both games, in the Karpov games and in my game here, white realized, but it was too late, that bishop takes d4 is a losing move because of knight takes e4, and after knight takes e4, queen takes d2 will lose a pawn without compensation. So the correct move would have been rook e1, and if whatever black plays, now white can go queen d2 because knight takes e4 is not there now because rooks can take. Well, in the game, queen d2 was played, however, knight takes d4, and now white has to play queen takes d4. And after knight g4, you have to know that queen d3, just retreating the queen, is very bad for white. Because after simple knight takes bishop and bishop takes c3, white is left with terrible pawn structure and absolutely lost position. So in both games there was played queen d5 in my game, and also Karpov played queen d5, but Karpov's opponent played queen takes d5, knight takes e3, and white managed to make a draw. But correct move, I knew that game and I knew where black went wrong, and that's why for me it was very easy, since I already knew this move, to play bishop takes c3. Now if white recaptures on c3, then queen takes d5 and knight takes e3, just that will give white absolutely hopeless pawn structure. So what happened here? H takes g, queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, and now we don't want to take on b2. The reason why we don't want to take on b2, because that allows white's rook to penetrate to b7, taking this pawn. What happened is bishop e5. This position was analyzed by me before. f4, bishop g7, and white cannot solve the problems they have because pawn on g4 is hanging, and any protection of this pawn, for example, if white plays g5, then black goes e6, and now it's not very good for white to take on b7 because after rook b8, now black's rook is going to penetrate on the second rank, and if bishop goes to b3, black is simply going to take pawn on b2. What happened in the game, however, after bishop g7, black played f5, same e6 move, fe, fe, bishop takes b7, rook takes f1, and here rook takes f1 would have been slightly better than king takes f1. After king takes f1, bishop b5 check, very strong check, because we want to attack the bishop on b7 by rook b8 without white having chance to play bishop a6. King g1, rook b8 forces white to play a4. Now bishop e2, white is in real bad shape here. Bishop c6, rook takes b2, rook c1, a6, because the pawn is hanging on a7, and also we want to try to take the b5 square away from white's light square bishop. And after a6, in g5 was played because pawn was hanging. Bishop e5, black's bishops dominate position, and white is absolutely lost here. a5 was played, bishop c4, and after c3, king f7, rook d1, bishop takes c3, and rook takes d6. Well, this is obviously very bad, because after rook b1 check, black loses its rook. King h2 will be met by bishop e5 check, and same thing happens on king f2. There is rook f1 check, forcing white's king on the same diagonal, and bishop e5 check again wins white's rook, and white resign. Again, very important game to know that queen d2 in the early position was not good. Now, the other game is also the tactical shot was used to generate the counterplay for black, and this is part of the theoretical DVD even, and that's what happened in the game. After e4 c5, knight f3 g6, d4 cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, bishop g7, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen a5, castling and castling, bishop b3, d6, h3, bishop d7, f4, queen h5. We already saw the game where white played queen takes h5. Now we're going to see the game where white played queen d3 and b5 was played. Now, b5 is the main move. Actually, it's the only move that gives black some significant counterplay. White can capture this b5 pawn 3 different ways, and none of those are good. Well, details of all 3 captures are well analyzed on a theoretical DVD, which you should get if you, definitely you should get if you try to play accelerated Draken on a serious level. White played rook a to e1, then a5. We continue pressing the pawns, creating the counterplay. After a5, knight d takes b5, and this is already bad position for white. Knight b4, forces queen to retreat to e2, queen takes e2, rook takes e2, and this is the tactical shot. Actually, the tactical shot was b5. So we give a pawn, and then we get back central pawn, getting superiority in a pawn structure. Knight takes e4, bishop takes b5, and after c4, a4. White has no choices but to play c takes b, and after a takes b, white must recapture on b3, getting terrible triple pawns, because after a3, knight c2, you see there is a threat of knight takes e3 followed by bishop d4, and also pawn on b2 is hanging, so white has to take a takes b, then rook f to b8. White at the moment has an extra pawn, but this triple pawns on b file are very, very bad for them. b6, knight d5, bishop f2, knight takes b6, knight c3, e6. Black has absolutely perfect pawn structure. After e6, knight b5 was played, and now d5, rook c1, knight d7, knight c7, rook a2. All black's pawns are very weak. They ended up losing b2 pawn, then they lost b3 pawn, and eventually they lost game. Position is absolutely helpless. Very good example. Well, in the position where we played b5, I will just want to tell you that the purpose of queen h5 move is to play b5. You don't want to play b5 when your queen is stuck on a5 and blocks your a pawn. Now, the queen blocks your a pawn, and the b pawn blocks your queen. So that's a bad combination of events. So, however, when we play queen h5, queen d3, b5, for example, taking on b5 now with the queen, loses immediately, because after knight takes d4, white can resign right away. Well, queen is hanging, and on queen takes h5, knight takes h5, they lost a piece. If knight c takes b5, then knight b4, and after queen c4, a5, we simply protect the knight, and then rook goes to c8. It's very well analyzed, and we want to go rook c8, we want to go bishop. If knight moves, then bishop e6. Also, pawn on e4 hangs. Position is clearly favoring black. So this is another typical shot, the tactical shot, b5, that allows white to black get to sufficient counterplay in this position. And finally, I want to show you one game that is interesting because we get new kind of pawn structure, well, which is slightly inferior for black, but gives them very active counterplay. Also, this is the game about missed opportunities and undermining some concrete ideas that was missed by both players. This is my game against very strong American player, and game went like e4 c5, knight f3 g6, d4 cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight f6, bishop c4, queen a5, castle for both sides. Everything pretty much standard, the way we looked in the other games. d6, h3, bishop d7, f4, and queen h5. After queen d3, I played b5. That's the main move on the theoretical DVD as well. That's the only move that gives black some counterplay. And as we already mentioned, there are three ways of taking this b5 pawn, and none of them is satisfactory for white. Well, of course, white has a variety of different continuations here, and my opponent chose knight takes c6, and after bishop takes c6, bishop d4, and we have to be, of course, we have to be here consistent, and we went a5. I went a5. Well, b4 will be met by knight d5, and white has some advantage in this typical position, because if knight takes d5 ed, and after bishop takes d4, notice that bishop takes d5 is bad because it loses material, and after bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, there is a pressure by white on e file, and this is not a good position for black. So, in the game, black played a5, and in this position, white played a4. Okay, the correct move was b4. It's the move that I did not play. I made right principle decision, which is wrong for some concrete reason. I played ba because I want to open B and C file, and then I played bishop b7 with the idea of going bishop a6, which turned out very good. And what was missed by both myself and my opponent is g4, where black is practically forced to sacrifice the piece, and they don't get sufficient compensation, because bishop takes g7, h takes g, followed by queen h2, and there is not sufficient compensation. This is interesting because g4 is counterintuitive move, but it happens that it takes all the squares for black's queen are taken away. Queen h6 will be met by g5, and queen h4 will be met by bishop f2. So those are the concrete reasons under which g4 move, otherwise anti-positional, can be very dangerous. In the game, this didn't happen. My opponent did play rook a to d1. Then I play bishop a6, and after bishop b5, bishop takes b5. This is already solid advantage for black. White has to capture the knight, and after queen takes b5, bishop takes g7, queen takes c7, queen takes b2. And now you see black has very strong pass pawn on a5. So this position, obviously, it's a serious advantage for black, and after queen takes d6, a4, f5, game lasted just a few more moves, a3, f6, king h8, and after king h8, white tries to create some threats to black's king by playing queen d2, trying to get queen on h6. Now a2, and after queen h6, rook g8. Now white plays rook f4. Well, black has to be careful, because if black promotes the queen, they will get mated. So black has to take necessary precaution by playing g5, and after rook a4, rook takes a4. Now rook d8, creating queen to g7 mating threat. But after queen b6 and king moves to h2, queen takes rook, obviously white resigns. This is actually an interesting game because unbalanced pawn structures are very typical and very common for accelerated Draken. And some of them are good, like this pawn structure was real good for black. And you have to be careful. Sometimes ideas like both opponents missed in the earlier stage, ideas where white could have played g4. This is anti-positional, but any anti-positional move is a good move if it wins for some concrete reasons, and this is exactly the case. So this was missed by both opponents, And nevertheless, game is very instructive. And this type of positions, this type of pawn structures are where black has isolated pawn on a5. Sometimes they can even have two isolated pawns on a5. For example, I will show you some positions, some strategical positions, but they are difficult to play. So what, bishop d7, queen d3 in this position, a6 we can play, or we can go here knight a5. Now, I played knight a5 quite often in those positions, and after queen e2, I remember I was getting this kind of pawn structures. a3 was played, and now queen a6. See, this is very ugly looking pawn structure for black, but very good position, in fact. The a pawn will be advancing, and black is going to get open b file, and they already have open c file. Knight will be coming to c4. Actually, this is highly unpleasant position for white. We're not going to go on with this particular pawn structure, but what I'm telling you, sometimes you have odd pawn structure, but it helps your dynamics for your pieces. Well, as we already mentioned in the earlier part of this DVD, and also in some on the theoretical DVD, sometimes we have position that absolutely weird pawn structure that doesn't look good, but in reality it is good. Well, castle, knight b3, queen c7, bishop g5, a6, a4, and now we go d6. I'm talking about this pawn structure, where white has beautiful knight on d5. They have better pawn structure, but black's has great dynamics in this position by playing f5, and that's what happened in the game that we already looked. This is dynamics of black's minor pieces. This black has at least an equality. So pawn structures may be different, unlike many other different openings where you know the pawn structure you're normally dealing with. Here, in accelerated Draken, since by the nature it's very, very dynamic opening, so you can see various different pawn structure and dynamic play of the pieces. And how do you learn what is good? So by looking more and more of these games, or use your own judgment. You may go wrong, but that's how you learn, and that's what makes accelerated Draken, in my opinion, very, very powerful opening. It's one of the greatest openings. It's, in my opinion, is a very, very strong opening, and my opinion is shared by Ripka, which in the analysis of every variation in accelerated says that white has very minimal to non-advantage. So thank you very much. Enjoy playing accelerated Draken and learning the game of chess. Thank you.